This is the last of, I believe, six sessions in the series. If you haven't been on, it's fine. Each one stands alone. But what we try and do in each session is to shed some light on a particular topic, to connect an Israeli leading figure along with a North American leading educational figure and put them in conversation with each other, which we don't do often enough. And so, as many of you know, this is an opportunity for us to listen in on an intimate, what we hope will be an intimate conversation between two incredible women. And with that, I would like to introduce the chairperson of the Jewish Agency, the chair, the head of the Jewish Agency, Isaac Bougie Herzog, please. Thank you.
So hi everybody. This is an incredible forum headed by Makom. Makom is the Jewish Agency's educational arm, which is dealing with the most important and interesting content of the Jewish people. And it's managed by Abby Dauber and her outstanding team, previously headed by Johnny Ariel, who's with us as well. And they're doing outstanding work, so thank you very much. With us are two key Jewish leaders, two key women Jewish leaders of great stature. And I think it's an amazing mix to bring both of them together. Because when Irina Nevzlin chairs the Jewish People's Museum, once called the Diaspora Museum and now called Anu, we. Anu means in Hebrew, we. When you walk into her exhibit of what it is, Jewish life all over the world, the first thing you see is a sermon and a prayer led by Rabbi Angela Warnick Buchdahl from Central Synagogue in Manhattan, who's an outstanding religious leader. And I have huge respects for both of them, and I know them well. And there's a lot to discuss. Because the story of Rabbi Buchdahl personally is a huge story of what identity, Jewish identity, is all about. And the book, which Irina Nevzlin recently published, sorry, there's noise. Caroline, can you mute yourself, please? Caroline Breidenbach. Okay, so I'm going back. So, and the book that Irina Nevzlin recently published, which deals with the issue of Jewish identity or personal identity, is so fascinating that I said to my people at the Jewish Agency, we've got to bring this discussion forward. What does it mean, our identity? It's part of the inner core of human beings. And Jewish identity, even more so. So they are both coming from incredible angles of what identity is all about. And I'm sure it's going to be a fascinating discussion. And hope you'll enjoy it, all of us together. So toda to all of you, and shalom, and thanks for taking part in this wonderful event.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great to have you with us for as long as you can be here. And we know you're between meetings, so as long as you can be here. Thank you. Okay, we're going to jump right in. We usually ask a question about your mood. And I'll tell you the mood I'm in, and then I'll ask a slightly different question than usual, which is I'm in the Passover, in the Pesach mood. We're about, 10, 12 days out from the first night of Passover. And I'd love to hear from each of you a favorite family or personal tradition that you have around Passover. Rabbi Buchdahl, would you start off, please?
Okay. I just have to start by saying part of my mood is just to be very excited to be here and in particular to be in conversation with both of you and just reflecting on something that I was reminded of that when Bougie talked about the museum is just that I grew up my whole Jewish life never seeing myself represented in the Jewish world. It's forget seeing any clergy that ever looked like me. I never saw a picture of any Jew that looked like me in a Jewish book, on the walls, in the congregations, and I had been told that I was being recorded for the Jewish Museum exhibit when I recorded the piece of Chazanut that I did, but I could not be prepared for how emotional it felt for me to walk into that museum. Besides the fact that, like, I think my face is 6 feet tall on the video screen, but it was literally the first time I'd ever seen, myself represented in an official Jewish institution in that way. And it was really very powerful. And I have to imagine it's not just about the way I look, but just the way this museum captures the whole of the Jewish world in a way that it always used to be a very specific sort of slice of the Jewish world that was represented as who we are. So I just have to say that, like, I was reminded of that with the introduction. I feel like I owe a personal debt of gratitude to Irina for the work she's done with that museum to have it represent our Jewish community in such a different way. And I guess I'll say that connects to Passover for me, because I think one of the things that's so powerful about our view of Exodus is, Jews don't talk about personal salvation. We don't talk about the fact that I'm individually redeemed. We're redeemed collectively and as a people. And so for me, the idea that we're trying to engage in a way that all of us together lift each other up and can come to a more collective redemption. It's not going to be okay if only the Jews of Israel survive and thrive. And it's not going to be okay if only the Jews of New York thrive and survive. We are fully in this together. And ultimately, the message of Passover is it's not even going to be enough if it's only Jews survive. We're really all in this together. And so I guess I don't know that I have one particular tradition. I have plenty of things I love. I love singing. I love the prepping. I love my mom's, kimchi that she has put on the Seder plate. This has become a part of our tradition. But I think that most of all, I'm just encouraged by the spirit, the hopefulness that always comes at this time.
Thank you. Irina.
Yes, Angela, first of all, I have to say that there was a lot of difficult choices in this museum to who should represent what, because ultimately we want to make sure that everybody is represented. I have to say that the committee that discussed putting, and we had a lot of committees, as you can imagine, we want to make sure that it's done in a way that we don't want to upset anyone. We want to make people uncomfortable in thinking, but we don't want to upset anyone. But choosing you as a role model was not a difficult choice at all. It was anonymous. It's who you are and what you represent. It makes it very special. I will be I'll say something very personal about Pesach tradition. As someone who has a Russian Jewish story of not really having a Jewish story in the childhood, what fills me with gratitude and hope and happiness is the fact that I can bring all my family, and my family, those who know me, Bougie knows me, we have a fascinating family of, my parents are divorced long time. My father is married to my best friend. My husband's son is dating someone who is older than me. And we have 5 dogs for all the family, and everybody always brings their dogs for some reason. But if I'm being serious for a second, we never had a Pesach Seder. And for me, when I bring a grandfather and grandmother who suffered for the fact that they're Jewish, it's really hard for them to go through the, Laila Seder because it's long. And my sons who are quite excited about that, but get lost in somewhere in the middle. But the fact that I can actually have it in my house and bring everyone together, people who are very religious to people who have no understanding of what's happening, is what the Jewish story is all about. So it's not about something specific. It's just about having this point and hopeful point in white, right? That I can bring everyone together. That's what makes it so special for me.
Thank you to both. 2 beautiful things. I'd love, if anybody in the chat would like to share any of their customs, we'd be happy for you to just put them in the chat so we can see. We'd like to talk about the chat. Osnat and I were saying before that it's like the whispers that you would whisper to each other if we were in a room together. So you should feel free to use the chat that way. When you have an urge to say something to somebody else in the room, put it in the chat. So the rest of us can benefit from that thought in your head, even if it's a small one. So I want to move a little bit more into your own stories. Each of us, by the way, including me, have moved around a lot, have been immigrants. in our lives, living and working and studying in multiple places. And I'd love to hear from each of you when and where you feel most grounded. What fuels your energy most? What makes you feel most trapped? And what makes you and where makes you feel most vibrant and alive? Irina, will you start us off?
Okay, so I feel very much privileged that most of my working life is devoted to doing something which has meaning for me. And it doesn't mean that everything is roses. It doesn't mean that it's easy all the time. Easy is not good. It's a lot of times challenging. But I think this ability to do something that is so important to me personally. So whether it's a museum or other things that I'm doing, and so I think that kind of having this notion of doing something that fills me with energy because it just has meaning and it's a part of the journey that I choose to take every moment. So that I think, and being able to tell the Jewish story in the way that we do in the museum and to celebrate it is, I think it's something that gives me energy. When I feel trapped, it's an interesting thing. I hate trapped, I just hate it. And then the most creative ideas come out of that mode. Like, so I think that it's the most, like when I'm the most annoyed and something is not working out, it's just, I just have to remember, and at that moment it feels that's about it. I know that later on some great idea will come out of it, maybe even doable. And grounded, I wish we had swimming pools open, really. That's the only time I can feel grounded. If I swim more than 1 kilometer, then I can be grounded, but that's me.
Great, thank you. Rabbi Angela.
Sure. I think feeling at home is what makes me feel grounded. And speaking of which, I just have to acknowledge that I have been on sabbatical for 4 months. So I've been away from, quote, my spiritual home for 4 months. And it's really fun for me this is actually my first event where I'm actually seeing some of my people from Central on the, in the boxes. And I'm very happy to see you. It's like a taste of home. So I just have to start with that. I think that I started much of my life feeling that I was a little bit homeless. I was born in South Korea, and South Korea is one of the most ethnically homogenous countries in the world, and there was a tremendous amount of stigma for biracial children. It actually persists to this day. And I was not super aware of that when I was young, but it's a big part of the reason that my parents left Korea. And when I moved to America, I had 6 months to learn a brand new language. I didn't speak a word of English, and I was entering kindergarten, and all these kids saw me with my seaweed in my lunch that my mother would pack or whatever, and they would say, "Where are you from?" And at the time, I would say, "Well, I'm from Korea," because that's what I thought. And then I remember our first trip back to visit our family in Korea. I was 8. And the kids would say, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from Korea," in Korean. And they said, "No, you're not." And I remember, I was in tears, and I said to my mother, I don't have a home. I'm not really at home in America. I'm not really at home in Korea. And my mother said, "Home is where your people are. Find your people, and you can make a home anywhere." And we threw ourselves into the Jewish community, this giant, thriving metropolis of Tacoma, Washington. We had 300 families, but it was a very tight-knit Jewish community. And I found my people there, and that really became home for me. And I was, involved in youth group, and I was song leading at the synagogue, and it was a real home for me. I found a sense of rootedness in this city in Tacoma, where my father's family had been for 3 generations as woodworking Jews. They ended up in the Pacific Northwest, and that became home. And then New York has now become my home, very much this crazy city. So I think that finding home has been an interesting process of, in some ways, leaving what is familiar. And it's not just, sometimes I think about the story of Avram and Sarah, and God said, you have to, lech lecha, you have to leave what's familiar and comfortable, go to a place that you don't know. And ultimately, even though they had to leave everything and become strangers, ultimately they end up in Israel, right? So, which is our homeland. So in a sense, there's a sense that sometimes you have to leave home to find your truest home. And I guess that's been in some ways my personal story. I'm energized by the boundary crossings that I've made along the way. To me, both the feeling of home, but also the feeling of being the stranger has been what's energized my life. I think that the Jewish story of boundary crossing, which we've always done, whether it's physically being the wandering Jews that travel everywhere, like Irina's story is in mine and yours, Abby, or if it's the emotional boundary crossings of, being countercultural, just knowing our story. I think that it has made Jews more empathetic. I think it's made us more creative as a people. I think it's given us a certain perspective. I think it's been the source of our strength. So for me, I think what makes me both rooted and energized is both the boundary crossing as well as the search for home.
Right. Thank you. It's interesting how discomfort, and both of you talks about it in different ways, right? How discomfort, either feeling trapped for Irina or boundary crossing, actually leads to a certain sense of creativity and productiveness or development. And that's a really, that's profound, because it takes so much, right, to come out of the places, come out with those other places that we're in. The first homes we were in to cross over. It's beautiful. So we'll talk about another choice, perhaps, that each of you made, which is becoming professional Jews. I know that Irina, I believe, worked in marketing earlier on in her career, and I don't know your story before you were a cantor, but I'd love to hear from both of you. Why did you choose to be professional Jews when there are so many other things you could do? Do you want to start this time, Rabbi Buchtal, and then we'll go to Irina?
Sure. I think that some rabbis talk about feeling called, or maybe more ministers and reverends talk about that than Jews. But I do truly feel that I was called to do this. But you have to imagine that the call wasn't like the voice of God booming, speaking very clearly to me. It was more like a terrifying whisper, like, you have to do this, you have to do this. And it went against everything that seemed logical in my life. and it went against, I think my mother, who always pushed me to do, and my parents who pushed me to do anything I wanted to do. When I came home from my very first trip to Israel when I was 16 on the Bronfman Youth Fellowship, and I just could not get out of my mind that the only thing I wanted to do with my life was to become a rabbi. My mother was just like, why would you do that to yourself? Like, why? I think there was a lot of protection and fear, knowing that even on that trip to Israel, I had been, my identity had been doubted, not just doubted, but seen as not authentic, I'm not halakhically Jewish with a non-Jewish mother. And there were people for whom it wasn't personal, it was just, that's the way it was. And so for my mother to see that I was going to be, that there was perhaps an immutable, definitional Jewish identity that I didn't have, and that I was going to fight against that my whole life. Would I ever get a job? Would I ever be accepted? These were questions when she was like, you can do anything with your life. Why would you want to put yourself up for that? And I guess this is where I trusted, or maybe it wasn't even trusting. I'm not really sure. I guess what I trusted was that I wasn't going to be alone in the journey. I did not trust that I was going to succeed in it, but I did feel that I guess you do things that are hard when you can't imagine doing anything else but that. And that's how I felt about being a rabbi. Like there were honestly times I had such sort of Jewish identity angst from age 16 to about 21, when I actually ultimately had a giur ceremony, what I'd call a reaffirmation, but it was a halakhic conversion ceremony when I was 21. In those 5 years of like tremendous angst, there were times where I was like, I'm not sure I want to be a Jew anymore. But I actually didn't ever want to do anything but still be a rabbi. So had to square that circle and push through that discomfort and the doubting voices. And I guess there was enough of that call in me that I just felt strongly I had to push through.
Can you just say another word about what in your mind, maybe if you can go back there, when you decided, or when you heard this, right, this whisper of be a rabbi, what was it? Do you think, was it about something that, like, for yourself that you needed to be a rabbi, or was it something that you hoped to give others, that the call came from?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what Judaism did for me, and I really felt it strongly, I felt the embrace of community and support and love and spirituality from my hometown synagogue, which was small, but very strong and very tight-knit and Hamish. And then when I went on this Israel program, it really kind of opened up what Jewish text learning was for me. And it forced me to ask the hardest questions that are the most meaningful questions of life. And I felt like if Judaism gave me the structure and the format and the color and the taste and the ritual for exploring, I thought, the biggest questions in life. And even though it was sometimes hard, I felt like I looked at these rabbis for whom this got to be what they brought into the world for others. And I just couldn't imagine a more gratifying thing to do. And I think that as much as I used to feel that my status is sort of what I felt like was a perpetual outsider in the Jewish community, was my Achilles heel. Like, I sort of felt like I'm not authentic enough, like I've got all these things. I don't look like a Jew, and believe me, plenty of Jews said that to me all the time. I started to understand when I listened to people's stories that almost every Jew is struggling with their own version of those questions of their own authenticity and where they belong and how they find home and what makes them really Jewish and where their identity is. And I realized that became my entry point to help many Jews struggle with these very questions that I think are the ones we should be thinking about in our lives. And so I think it's become one of the things I can offer as a rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you, Irina.
It's amazing how we can come from such different places and how we can have a similar experience, really. And I completely agree that being an outsider is what seems to be the worst thing in the world in the beginning, what turns out to be the best thing ultimately. I completely think that that's built me. I'll tell you that for me, I'm very happy that I came to choose to devote almost all of my time to Jewish people in Israel. It came when I was in the age of 30. And I'm very happy that I had made a circle before that, and I did other things before that, because I could actually come to that, making it a real choice. And as much as you can have a real choice, you always believe you want to have a real choice, but it's this ability to do something that ultimately I do it for my family and for my country and for my people, right? And it's like, whatever skills I'm given, what else could give me the better satisfaction if I do it for the people that are actually my people, right? So it's unfortunate for me to see a lot of times that people stay in the Jewish professional world because they can't find themselves. I think it's very, very sad, the Jewish world. I think we want to have people who actually chose to be there with their enormous skills that they could do anything else, make any money and have any influence outside, but they chose to devote themselves to the Jewish people. I'm privileged. I'm going to be very honest. I could choose anything, and I did choose many things, and I continue to do things which are outside of the kind of straightforward Jewish professional life, because I'm just a curious person and I need the crash of differences to thrive. But I think this honestly, this ability to impact what's your people and your country and your story. I mean, I don't know how you do anything else, really.
You've both mentioned Israel in some way or other, right? Rabbi Buchtel, you talked about your first experience on Bronfman Youth Fellows, and Irina, you chose, it feels to me like there was some sort of calling perhaps to be here in Israel. And I'd love to just hear a little bit about your own relationships with the country, with the homeland. Obviously, and quite purposely, it's different. One of you lives in Israel and one doesn't. But I'd love to hear just some thoughts about where is Israel for you? Where does it play in your Jewish identity? Where does it play in the way you think about the world and the role that the Jewish people has, vis-a-vis Israel? Irina, you want to start?
Yeah, I feel like sometimes like a parrot, because I'll have to tell the same story that maybe some of you heard already, but I have to learn from Angela that it's okay thing to, when something is important to you, to repeat your story. But I'll tell you what happened with me was that at the age of 13, I came to Israel first time. And I came here without any previous knowledge about what Israel is and the Jewish story is, because we didn't have an opportunity to learn that, just because, you weren't really allowed to learn that in a communist Russia. And when I came here, my mother had the important conversation with me about, it was first time traveling abroad. It was, I come from it's a regular Russian family. You don't go abroad before 13. It's only my children managed to travel. It's in my belly before they were born, and since then. But for us, it was the first time plane, and then the first time abroad. And my mother was explaining to me the concept that when I come, it will be different people, different language. I shouldn't, get too shocked about that. And it will be different smells and everything. And so everything was right, apart from the fact that the moment that I landed and I saw now it's not there anymore because Ben Gurion is expanded as an airport. It's huge, but there was, if you remember this, there was an orange fields coming from the old terminal. There was orange and fields, and it was orange everywhere. And so from the moment I saw that until the moment I left, and especially Kotel was the most amazing experience for me, where I didn't know what Kotel was. It's really kind of annoying to say that now, running a Jewish organization, I didn't know what it is. When I was standing there, and I remember that now, 2 days ago, I went there to kind of close the circle, I think, for me. But when I was standing, and I like to stand very close so I can be in between the three walls. So it's like I'm inside. So it was a place that I knew. And Israel didn't feel at all what my mother told me. It was totally different smell, much better pizza and hummus and everything, much better than gray Russia and no smell at all. But it was home. And so for me, imagine 13-year-old person who comes from thinking that she has a home. Angela, I wasn't that aware of myself. I think I didn't know I was missing something until I actually came to Israel. And then I realized I wasn't living at home ever. I was actually home was other place. Now it's a very hard understanding, but my life was never the same. Now, of course, I had a great idea, because we all have great ideas and logic, that I will move here when I retire, because it's a very small country. I love to work big things international. I love to travel. I can't live here. The market is too small, and there's all this conversation. And then, yes, at the age of 28, I was coming here to help my mother, who decided to make Aliyah. And on the plane, I realized I was moving home. I cannot say it was if I was to do the normal thing, which is advantages and disadvantages. I made Aliyah from London, and I left a very luxurious job. But if I had to do the minuses, pluses, I had to stay in London and go to New York later on, and Washington maybe. But what happened is that it's just home. And so I just made Aliyah.
No, it's very moving.
I again just marvel at, I listened to Irina, and we came from such different places, and I could basically say the same thing. I mean, different circumstances, and it's really hard to articulate why it felt this way. But I will be honest with you, before I came on this trip, I'm not sure that I would have told you that I really wanted to come to Israel. I mean, I had one first cousin who made Aliyah. He was about 10 years older than me. And so, my family had a connection already to Israel. My grandmother had brought me back, a necklace from Israel when she went to visit her grandson. And, I felt a deep sense of, pride. But, I'm not sure it would have been on my top 5 list of places to visit. And then I got this fellowship, which just changed my life. And I think coming here, it was, I don't know if it was partly that I, in my heart, feel like a little bit like an immigrant and slightly out of place, and I speak too loud, and my mother speaks too loud, and I kind of and the food in our house is like more pungent and smelly, and I don't know what, but when I came to Israel, I was like, oh, this is home. Like there was something like this country of immigrants where everyone's really loud and it's colorful and smelly, and people are like smashed up against each other, and it was like something about it, like in this very hard to like pin down way, felt so comfortable, so much more like what home was than Tacoma. And I guess also the diversity, like the flush of diversity, and I couldn't get over the fact that, like, you know, the only Jews I knew in Tacoma, they were mostly like the doctors and the lawyers, and they maybe owned a jewelry shop or something. But like here, I was like, I couldn't get over the fact that they were all of those things, and they were the taxi driver, and they were the shopkeeper, and like in every realm and in all colors, and then the learning that I was doing on top of that, and meeting people, like I got to hear from Yehuda Amichai and ABO Shua, and like unbelievable speakers who I didn't even appreciate, who I was getting to meet at the time on this program. They just, you know, it was like, wow, there is something magic that is happening in this place where all these Jews gather of all these different, like not just colors and like places, but like positions and backgrounds, and that I just felt like something in the alchemy of it all created a magic of Jewish peoplehood that like I wanted to be a part of always, but also that just changed me as a Jew. So, I mean, in terms of like what this does for my current relationship with Israel, I mean, I've been back to Israel, you know, 25 times. I've lived in Israel for stretches of time, including a year of rabbinical school. I feel deeply, deeply connected. I think that at the same time, it's not like a true loving relationship. I have critique. I have disappointments, you know, betrayals. I feel that for my own, like for America as well. And I think that the bottom line, though, is that when you are in a relationship like this, and it is family to me, Israel is family, you stay engaged, you stay invested, and you work to continue to build that relationship as much as you possibly can from the position I'm in, which is not the same as Irina's or yours living there. But I do think that we can have a real relationship, even from afar.
You know, there's a lot of research today showing that there is a growing gap particularly between North American Jews and Israeli Jews. Right. So hearing each of you speak, I mean, even though I know you're not from North America, but the experience, right, of coming to Israel, the experience of feeling home seems less and less the way people today experience Israel. And I would say less and less how Israelis experience North American Jews as well. And so I'm going to ask you one of my favorite questions. It's like the magic wand question. If you were the president of Israel, what would be your signature project to build gaps between North American Jewish communities and Israeli Jewish communities, between Israel and North America? Who wants to start? It's a big question.
I can start.
Go ahead. Great.
First of all, if we were the president of Israel, we could do much.
I would be so thrilled if you were the president of Israel. I mean, you should run, please.
Let's do co. You know, that's what Jewish people need. Let's do together.
That's by the way, that's the op-ed you two should write after this call. But go ahead.
Look, I'll tell you. I think that there are elements missing, and I will of course say, like I think everybody is. Saying probably when you ask that question, it's all about education. Ultimately, it's about inspiration and education that way or another. But I'll take it to a little bit, maybe different direction. What we do in the museum, making sure that everybody is represented, right? Comfortable or uncomfortable, with a lot of respect, with giving the space to everyone, with not trying to provoke anyone. We don't. It's not our job description to provoke. It provokes, but it's not. But what we do actually is what Israel as a state should be doing, first of all, educational wise. It shouldn't be the museum of the Jew. That's my conversation with the Minister of Education forever. We shouldn't be telling the story of the Jewish people only in the museum. The Minister of Education should be telling that to kids in school. And we should be the place where they experience that and go through something that helps to deepen that connection. But we shouldn't be the one that they have to go through 3 floors to learn about that. We should be for tourists, and we shouldn't be only for kids. So that's one thing. But I'll tell you, it might sound a little bit idealistic, but I think what is lacking is a common goal, I think. What happens is that when you have a family, the place that Angela comes from and the place that I come from is that first and foremost, there's a goal because we're stronger together than we are apart. And then there comes the question of you work in the family, if the family is hard, if you want to keep it together. And to keep it together, you need to know why really you want to be. So what's lacking for me for a couple of years now, it's the fact that there is no proper vision for Jewish people. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of groups of people that talk about vision, and they're very impressive people there, but we all know it starts and continues and will end as a conversation and not as anything that will be practical. Because one of the problems of that is that there's this vision, this vision tries to embrace us all, tries to be very philosophical, tries to be about the values, and it's all very important. However, until the vision becomes practical, it's not, until the vision becomes doable. And if you don't do things together, it's really hard to stay together because you don't have a real reason. Now, I know that from Herzl. I learned that very good way when I read the Medinat HaYehudim, right? Because what I realized is that he had a very bright idea of why there should be a vision, but also it followed with a very practical solution of how you implement that vision. The vision was very simple, right? It's the next year in Jerusalem. That's about that, right? Acceptance of reality was that there's anti-Semitism, but that's not the reason. But ultimately, his very boringly written manuscript, that's why I think it has to be in school more, but this book talks about how you create the bank, who you put first, and it's very it goes into very practical detail, right? So there is a big picture, but then there is a vision. And now, what you know is that years after that, the state was created because there was a roadmap and there was a vision, and it was very, very honest. It was, you can agree or disagree whether Zionists were right. That's already a conversation that Jewish people like to have. But ultimately, there was a paper, there was a direction, and I think that it's really hard to find a way of sticking together in the world where blaming is more of the mainstream than anything else, and the cooperation is not, it's regarded to be legal and normal now and legitimate to blame anybody else for your trouble, which I think is really appalling, frankly, because all responsibility is on each and every one of us only. But I think there has to be a vision that is for Jewish people, that Israel, of course, is a big part of it, but not only. And then and only then you can have an energy. It will not going to be the energy going like this. It's actually could be energy that is driving to something forward.
I would love for you to be in charge. Thankfully, you are in charge of so many things already that will help change that. And I agree with all you say. I think I'll add another angle. I think education is so key, and yet there are times when if someone is very set in their views, that the education, they'll listen to what they want to hear and ignore the things they don't. And I think the thing that I found that changes hearts more than anything else, when the mind doesn't want to go there, is true relationships. And I've seen that in America when we think about some of the massive social changes that have happened. We've done a lot of education around gay rights, but it was really when a critical mass of people had relationships with people who were willing to come out of the closet and say, I'm gay, or enough people had a gay son or a gay neighbor. And the relationships is what actually pushed forward the policy, the bridge building, the humanization. And I think that we don't have relationships. And I think that for me, when I get very, very frustrated with what's happening, maybe perhaps that the government of Israel is running, and people talk about, we're anti-Israel, or which is an increasing sentiment among American Jews, as I think for me, what keeps me in it are relationships with real Israelis that I know are fighting the same fight, and that, you know, I don't characterize Israel as just this one-dimensional governmental policies, you know, and I think that's really key. So I think, you know, reverse birthright, I'm sure you've heard that. Like, I think it would make a big difference. It's done a lot for American Jews to come to Israel. I think that Israelis would benefit tremendously from seeing what American Judaism looks like. And when they don't see it, it's so easy to demonize. Last week, I had the distinction of being featured in one of those horrible ultra-Orthodox advertisements against the conversion decision that came out of the Supreme Court. And, you know, they pictured my face. They called me a goy rabbah with quotes around my rabbah title, and said that I performed, you know, a marriage between a non-Jew and a Jew. I mean, their non-Jew was a Russian Jew who they didn't consider Jewish enough. She was Jewish enough to fight in the army, but she wasn't Jewish enough to be considered a Jew for marriage. So, like, I think to myself, you know, I have zero relationship with that community, unfortunately, and they have zero with mine. And that enables them to not just disagree, but to demonize in the most ugly ways. And so I think that we've learned through the last year of the pandemic that if we can't afford to fly everyone back and forth, that actually relationship building can even happen through technology. And so we don't really have an excuse now that it takes too much money to build some of these relationships. And I think that that has to be the building block of these bridges. Like, I think that we're going to add the other pieces are important. I absolutely think we have to have a shared vision. I think we absolutely have to do more education. We have to do all of that. But I think that as a fundamental block, we have to have some of these basic relationships where we know each other. And then we might be willing to actually get in together with on the stuff that we have to do for this, you know, for this one Jewish community that we've got.
Yeah. Irina, as an Israeli, and you only represent yourself, I realize, so it's not an entirely fair question, but I am wondering, you know, with that critique that you know, that Rabbi Naftal just gave of some of the views coming from here, from Israel. If you have thoughts on that, if you agree, if you disagree, if you have other thoughts on how to address those issues.
Look, I think that we're living in the world where extreme and lack of ability to listen became norm and became legitimate. I think what we hear now, things we can hear now, and when you, Angela, when you were talking about what they did to your picture, I was imagining, you know, the flashes of Dreyfus comes, you know, and the pictures of the Jews that they did back then, and it's hard to see that. It's hard to see that it's actually possible in the 21st, in the year 2021. But then I'm not going to criticize anyone politically, but you just had a fascinating president, you know, which used that, and we have a lot of leaders everywhere in the world which use that. I think that what I'm always kind of upset about is that there is so much weight given to people who actually have extreme views and very much a victimhood mentality and have a voice because the internet allows them, but actually do not represent the majority. They're very, very loud, but they really don't represent many. There are more of them because it became legitimate to voice those things. It wasn't unethical to say those things, you know, 5 years ago, but it became kind of a norm. But it's still, I think that the majority of people are much more balanced than that. And so what happens is that even here we discuss these things and we give them voice, where in fact, I think we have to have more people with common sense and more voices and give that a space, because I think we're kind of, when it comes to people who are more balanced in their views and have more kind of balanced, more pragmatic, I'm sorry to say, I'm not saying pragmatic in a bad way, I'm saying pragmatic, but you live with compromise all your life. You can't pretend you're not, right? But so we are like, as people who are maybe quieter, we choose not to stand for obvious, and we choose not to state the obvious because it's obvious, but it's not. It's actually calling the good and bad. I think we just have to learn that right now, because they are loud, the extremes here on the, you know, on the outside are loud. We just have to be loud too. We just have to state the obvious things. This is right and this is wrong. And we are kind of so used to being well educated and mannered and like hoping that everybody will understand, but it's not. You just, I think you have to fight the darkness with light, really, and not just, and not spend much energy contemplating about the dark, because we just give it power.
So while we're on challenging topics, I'm interested to talk about your gender, about being women, and women in leadership roles. In some ways, this era has been the era, right, where women in many ways have stepped into real leadership roles, and in other ways with the Me Too movement, not just the movement, but with right, the coming, the real impact of abuse and harassment of all kinds. We see another side of society. And so I'd love to hear from each of you about how you use the fact that you're women, how you use that in the places of power that you're each in, to lead the next generation. What words of wisdom or advice do you have to women of who are growing up today to step into their leadership? Do you want to start, Rabbi Angela?
I'm happy to start. I think about, I've reflected that when I got to college, I had already so mined my identities as a Korean and as a Jew, and I'd actually given almost no thought to being a woman in terms of my identity. And I don't even I don't apologize for that. It just sort of felt like it was not an issue. I don't know how to explain it. I remember that my college roommate was very involved with the Women's Center on my campus, and I remember thinking to myself, why do we even need a women's center? Like, what's this for? Like, the work of feminism is done. We've arrived. Like, we're doing well. Now, what's so I feel so naive about is, like, we weren't even close to done. I mean, I think about the fact that I walked around a campus that had, hundreds of male names on every building and not a single woman. I think about the fact that 5% of the faculty tenured were women and 95% of them were men. I think about the fact that only 15 years earlier, and I just didn't have the memory of this, 15 years earlier, the campus had 7 men to every 1 woman, because they'd only, they'd gone co-ed 20 years earlier, and they actually fought tooth and nail to not equalize the genders until Title IX came along and forced it because of federal funding. These are the kinds of things that people have very short memories for when you're an idealistic 18-year-old. And so I would just say that I walked through so much of my young adult life with kind of a wonderful naivete and idealism that I can do anything a man can do, and there's no barrier, and we're done with this fight. Now, that started to change the first baby I had, and suddenly I saw my career, partly by choice, but partly by circumstance and the way that society has sort of set up the structures of everything. I took the maternity leave. I slowed down my career to a point where I wasn't 100% sure that I would ever get back to it. And I watched my husband, who couldn't have been a more supportive husband, just continue to go on his trajectory while mine was stalling. And that began part of this conversation. And then I would say that I generally felt like I was lucky enough to get, every job I wanted to get, I got, and every position seemed like I was in the running. And it wasn't until I applied to be the senior rabbi of Central Synagogue, which is a role that had never been held by women. And in general, large congregations, you could count on one hand the number of women who ran really large congregations at that point, which was 2013 when I was applying. Not even on one hand. And it was suddenly when I wanted a job that no woman had really had before that I actually understood and appreciated for the very first time, in a sense, and I'm embarrassed because I was in my 40s already at this point, that I really understood how much I was standing on the shoulders of women who would smash those stained glass ceilings and ceilings before me, and how much I'd taken that for granted, and that I butted up against sexism in a way that I'd never experienced in other previous job searches. And this is in a home, I'm going to say this in front of some of my central congregants, where I already felt like people knew me and loved me. but things that come out in veiled and not so veiled ways. Nobody thinks they're sexist, but they ask questions like, how are you going to do this job with your 3 children? And I said, well, did anyone ask the rabbi down the street how he was going to do his job with his 4 children? I don't think he ever got asked that question. And I got asked that question multiple times. Are you sure, because you're so spiritual, that you want to do development work or management work? These are sort of veiled ways that people undercut that women don't really have the leadership to run an institution. And they were comfortable with me as a number 2 because we've seen that before. But really having a woman in the number 1 position was not something that people were all fully comfortable with. And then couple that with, like, a couple years later, the Me Too movement and my realization of how much, not just implicit, but seriously explicit harassment and sexual stuff that I just kind of put up with and kind of assumed is just the way people get to talk to you, from the way I dressed to, like, you're too pretty to be a rabbi, to, like, all the ways that, like, undercut. And it suddenly, like, I have to say that it took me to, like, not that long ago for me to find, like, sort of my angry bra burning feminism. And I don't know that I'm that it's helpful to be in a place of anger. I don't think I'm just in an anger, but it made me realize my own naivete. And so part of my commitment is that since I've kind of come to a greater understanding, and it's taken me way too long to understand it, I become much more self-conscious about mentoring young women. I've, I think a point of pride for me is that, how many times I've been asked to do someone's installation when they leave Central and go off, and I've done like 9 women's installations, like, where I feel like I've really mentored them and helped them land their place in the larger, and that's my commitment, is that I raise a generation of young women leaders who are going to take these roles. I mean, I think another thing which I'll just mention, which I feel like is really important, is I realized one of the reasons that my career changed trajectory when my husband's did not is that my synagogue was generous in giving me maternity leave for 3 months, and they did that for every woman. All women, but they did not do that for men. So I just want you to imagine what it's like for a synagogue, imagining hiring a 26-year-old female rabbi who's going to have 3 children in a row, and how many months they're going to give her maternity leave, and resent it perhaps, and how if they hired a 26-year-old male rabbi who had 3 babies, he wouldn't get any time off. And think of what this does, not just to their careers, but to their desire to hire women and keep them, and change any systems that creates equality. So one of the things that Central changed once I became the rabbi is we now have, and really insist on, our male clergy also taking 3 months of paternity leave, and or any parent to take 3 months of paternity leave if it's adoption, if it's anything. And I don't, not only is that about changing the structure right in that moment, and of course, importantly, giving all parents an opportunity to really bond with a young child, it changes the parental involvement trajectory for the rest of that career. It really does. And so we can't actually have equity until we change the systems that undergird it. I realized it wasn't just my fault that my career was slowing down. We just had systems set up that really have inequity built into them for women. And I'm just starting to understand that and try in the field that I can touch to make that change. That feels like my commitment now.
Wow. Thank you for hearing that.
Look, my answer will be much shorter, and it may be part of my early 40s and still naivety that you were talking about. But I think it's that and some other things. I'll tell you. First of all, I come from it's appalling how accepting I am to the fact that the environment can be sexist. But I come from Russia, okay? So it's like explaining that women is not furniture is a hard job there in itself. So. But I think that because of the character, I never truly experienced what a lot of women had to go through. In a way, I experienced that, but I knew how and when to put boundaries, just because I had the strength, I think, to do that, internal strength. And I have to say that it took me a while to understand that something is off for me. When I was searching it was funny, I was searching for role models for actually not for something deep, but for speaking, right? And so any role model that I'll find, and I was looking at the American presidents and I was looking around, and that will be, it's the either American president that, you know, would inspire me in terms of the speaking skills, like Bill Clinton, right? Or I'll have to go to Michelle Obama, who will be the wife of the president, right? So, and then I realized that there are so few role models for me anywhere that are female. Now it didn't bother me much because I thought it was all in the past, right? But because it's kind of that's what Angela said. I also felt that it changed much. I have to say that it wasn't an issue for me. And I think for me, you need to understand when I have to write who I am, and I did such thing for my book, like small, like I don't know how you call it, when you can put it in the and put the page that you're reading in. So I did like
A bookmark?
Bookmark. Yep, that's the word. Thank you. I'm 3 languages in one head. And I did, and I wanted to write who I am. So when I write who I am, a woman will come up as the 7th thing. So, and it's not because I'm not appreciative of the fact that I'm a woman. It's just because it's not something that is relevant to my day-to-day experience, in the sense that I don't feel the need to express it. It's first and foremost, I'll write a Jew. Whatever happens, Jew is the first thing I write. I don't even write Jewish woman. And then I get to the point where I say, oh, by the way, I'm a mother also. That means I'm a woman also, and I'm a wife also, okay? So it's not something that is on my agenda, but what's interesting is that it doesn't mean that I don't care. But what I care about is truly that everybody is represented. And so for me, when I realized that I can't follow the lead of men leading figures in terms of leadership just because I have totally different skills, right? I couldn't do that. I couldn't show off as an alpha male, even if I wanted to. And you know, it's not who I'm too gentle for that. But what I realized with time is that actually the fact that I have kind of both things, and I'll say something now. I hope nobody will be. I'm not trying to offend anyone, but there are some obviously things that are attributed more to the skills of men, and some are more attributed to skills of women. So with women, it's nurturing and like making sure that everybody can come together. And that for me was a blessing, that in the museum, when we had to go through a very difficult transformation, you know, it's not I will share a secret, not everybody accepts change so easily, right? And so going through change and actually having this kind of female side to me, that I can help people go through that and be with them and create an environment which is supporting environment, which is what usually mothers do, right, on one hand. But on another hand, having something which, it annoys me, but the very logical thinking, very rational thinking is much attributed to men, but thank God I have that part in me too. So I think that combining this thing, and when I do, and I don't have a specific commitment to women, I have specific commitment to people and talented people, but what happens as a result, as I see, for example, on the team of the museum, is we have 50% of women in leading positions. And when I now established the business, the woman who runs it is a very impressive woman. So I don't think I do it consciously. I would like to take credit, but I won't. But I think ultimately the way the world is that you really have to have both to be able to have a picture which is complete. And so that's what I'm trying to make sure, is that everybody has their chance.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to say so much more. We're really at time. So I'm going to say one final word and then ask you to each in about 20 seconds, give a final word as well, which is I'm going to ask you each to share one text or one thinker or one writer that you want to offer to the group that you recommend that's had an impact on your life. And I'll just offer my text in light of this last question, this last conversation we had just now about women. I've been thinking about the Passover Haggadah, and a colleague of mine says that she reads the whole Haggadah in the feminine. And rather than reading, you know, our fathers and our forefathers and our children and our grandchildren, which in the Hebrew is Banenu, I think it's Banenu, Uvnei Banenu, our sons and the sons of our sons, right? It's just one of the many masculine languages. Try reading that in the feminine, you know, our daughters and our daughters' daughters. And that's just been playing in my head as I'm preparing for the Seder of what would it sound like. And I come from quite a traditional home. What would it sound like to change that up? Even if not out loud, even just as I read it and have that there. So I'd love to hear one just really quick final, an offering of a text or a writer, thinker that you'd like to offer the group. Irina, do you want to offer one?
You know, I actually, if you don't mind, I'm reading a book now, and I usually would, in the presence of rabbi, I wouldn't go for Jewish texts because I'll feel quite illiterate. But I have to tell you, that I'm reading now a book which I don't think I will like that much, even though it's too medical for me sometimes. But it's by Michael J. Fox, and it's his last book, No Time Like the Future: An Optimist Considers Mortality. And I have to say, I know his story, obviously, who doesn't, and Back to the Future is the movie, right? But like this, and he writes a lot about his experience with Parkinson, but what you said now, and I'll connect it to Pesach, what he has to go through every day in making sure that there is one thing, that there's a lot of medical information, which is hard for someone who is not that into that, but there is one thing which he says, that in order for him to not fall, and falling is a big thing for Parkinson, for someone with Parkinson, because it's a threat. He actually has to be conscious about every step he makes. He cannot walk unconsciously. He cannot just, pass like we do. He has to choose, and the right turn is more comfortable than the left turn. So he has to choose the direction that he goes, and every stride he has to stop and think. Now, I was thinking to myself, really, first of all, I mean, you have to have enormous soul and strength to go through that and continue on living and doing, right? But also, if only we could learn to actually stop and make a conscious step, once a year, maybe. I'm not saying we're all very spiritual people, but not every moment. So that was a very inspiring book for me.
Thank you.
I'll just share that we have the kavod of having Michael J. Fox be a member of Central Synagogue. His children all became B'nai Mitzvah.
Wow.
I had the privilege of doing 2 of them, but he really truly is a remarkable soul and has become such a deep spiritual teacher through his suffering.
Wow.
I will say that I've been doing some reading of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, and I just find in this year where so many of us have been enforced into essentially isolation, and I've been lucky that I've been living with my family, but on sabbatical in particular, one son is off on a gap year and the other is living in a different place, and my husband's working all day, my daughter's in school all day, and I kind of, even in my own home, felt a little lonely because I had nothing to do, and I was by myself a lot, and I didn't have nothing to do. I filled my time, but there's a sense of the contemplation of aloneness, and I in particular am really struck by the message that this is a man that if we were to diagnose him today, we would probably say he had bipolar disorder, and he clearly had moments of great productivity and then also just tremendous bouts of depression. And yet he would not only find solace in kind of going out into the woods and finding ways that he could do this, but he really took it as a religious mandate to find joy every day. And I think that I think it's a profound teaching for us all the time, but I think in particular in this time we're in right now, that it's not just about a self-care or some of the language that people use, or it's not a shallow level of superficial happiness that we're all seeking, of the sort of material stuff that people think make them happy. But the idea that like every day finding something in which we find joy is a way that we connect with God and with something profound in us, and that it really is in maybe one of the most important sort of spiritual stances is to find joy. And I guess as we enter into Pesach, and we're already in the month of Nisan, and it's like in some ways it's one of our new years. And it does really feel right now like something is shifting. I feel like it's the beginning of the end of this chapter and the beginning of something new, and for us to find joy in it every day. That's like that's been my spiritual practice.
Amen. Amen. Thank you all so much. I know we're over time. I'm just going to let Osnat Fox have the last word as she has put together this incredible series. Osnat.
A word. Challenges and tough discussions, women's place, horrible political shaming, I think is the right word. So much is on my mind as we finish this discussion. I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to our wonderful speakers. Thank you, Abby, for wonderful facilitation. And Johnny, for creating this Makom Salon with me. This brings to an end our second series of the Makom Salon. We are already starting to dream of what future series will look like, and we'll be sure to keep you posted. I'm speechless, which is a new thing for me. So thank you very much. Chag Pesach Sameach.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Great day and good evening.
Thank you. It's great to see everyone and to be in this conversation.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.